My name is Layla Monroe, and I just turned 27. What was supposed to be a birthday dinner in a fancy Philadelphia wine bar became the most shocking moment of my life. My parents watched nervously as my grandfather, the billionaire Franklin Boyd, finally arrived. He never comes to these things. He smiled at me, a warm, gentle smile. Then he asked a simple question. "So, is the new loft comfortable?" I just stared back. What loft? My parents went completely still. The warmth vanished from his face. He turned to them. His voice was dangerously quiet. "Then where did the money go?" Before that moment, my life felt normal. I was a visual storyteller at a small startup hub. I made just enough for my bills, and for good coffee. My home was a 2-bedroom loft, a little worn down. I split the steep rent with my roommate, Jenna Pierce. City living, right? But our place had soul. Mismatched furniture, walls covered in our art. Even with a billionaire grandpa, I was proud to be independent. My parents, Calvin and Margaret, they lived that upper-middle-class dream. A big suburban house with a pool, lavish vacations twice a year. My dad had a senior corporate job. My mom was in real estate. They seemed successful. They never offered me a dime. They always said, "You have to earn your own way." When I graduated with $70,000 in student debt, they just said, "Welcome to adulthood." While other parents helped with down payments or covered a few months of rent to help their kids get started, mine handed me a copy of Dave Ramsey and told me building character through struggle was important. I never resented them for it. Not really. I was determined to prove I could make it on my own. But there were times when things got really tight that I wondered why they seemed so reluctant to help, especially when they would show up in a new luxury car or talk about the kitchen remodel they were planning. Grandpa Franklin Boyd was an enigma to me. He had built his fortune in real estate development, starting with nothing and eventually creating one of the largest property companies in the Midwest. He was stern, intimidating, and rarely attended family functions. When he did show up, everyone walked on eggshells around him. But despite his gruff exterior, he always had a soft spot for me. On the rare occasions we spoke, he would ask thoughtful questions about my design work and actually listen to my answers. My cousin Natalie was the only one in our generation who seemed to have benefited from the family wealth. She had a trust fund that gave her a very comfortable lifestyle. She never worked a day in her life, but constantly posted photos from exotic locations and high-end restaurants on social media. Whenever we were at family gatherings together, she would talk about her latest shopping spree or vacation in a way that felt deliberately designed to highlight the differences in our situations. The week before my birthday had been particularly rough. The design startup hub I worked for lost a major client, and I was among the 5 employees who got laid off. With just enough savings to cover maybe 2 months of expenses, I was panicking about how I would make rent while searching for a new job in a competitive field. When my parents called to insist on taking me out for a fancy birthday dinner, I tried to decline. I suggested we do something simple instead. The laughter was warm, the wine was flowing. My 27th birthday. I took a bite of the decadent chocolate cake surrounded by my family. Then everything shifted. Grandpa Franklin Boyd tapped his crystal wine glass. The familiar chime, a sound I'd always ignored. The conversation died. He started telling a story, one I'd heard before, about teaching me to ride a bike. But halfway through, his tone changed. It turned cold, calculated. He mentioned an account, the Boyd Legacy Trust. I'd never heard of it. He listed numbers, vast sums, then an address, a penthouse in Philadelphia. My fork clattered against my plate. That was the property. The exact one my mom, Margaret, was browsing online. The air vanished from the room. My father, Calvin, stared at his hands. My mother's smile was frozen, a terrified mask. This was never a birthday party. It was an intervention, a family summit. The sweet cake turned to ash in my mouth. My whole life, My struggles. They were a choice. Their choice. Who were these people? And what else had they stolen from me? I had worked 3 jobs to pay for my design degree. I skipped meals to afford supplies. My entire adult life was a calculated performance of scarcity. And they were the directors. My own family. The people who preached character and hard work were sitting on a fortune. My fortune. The expensive perfume in the air now smelled like a lie. The clinking silverware sounded like falling shackles. I looked at my parents. Their guilt was a physical thing, a heavy blanket smothering the room. Grandpa Franklin's steely eyes held mine. He wasn't celebrating. He was auditing. He knew. He knew everything, and he had finally decided to speak. My heart wasn't breaking. It was hardening into something new, something fierce. They wanted a summit. They were about to get a war. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, and the tables were dressed in crisp white linens. The hostess led us to a table in the center of the dining room where my parents had already arranged for a bottle of champagne to be waiting on ice. I felt immediately out of place in my simple black dress and the same heels I had worn to job interviews for the past 3 years. My mother was draped in a designer outfit I had never seen before, with a necklace that probably cost more than my rent. My father wore an expensive-looking suit with gold cufflinks that caught the light when he reached for his water glass. The conversation felt forced from the beginning. They asked surface-level questions about my job search, but changed the subject whenever I expressed any real concern. Instead, they kept steering the conversation toward safe topics like a movie they had recently seen or updates about distant relatives I barely knew. After we ordered, they presented me with their gifts, a designer wallet and a scarf that, while beautiful, seemed strangely modest considering the wine bar they had chosen. As I thanked them, my mother launched into a familiar lecture about financial responsibility and the importance of building good credit. I was halfway through my entree, nodding along to another of my father's stories about his college days when the atmosphere in the wine bar suddenly shifted. People at nearby tables straightened in their seats and the staff became noticeably more attentive. I turned to see what had caused the change and spotted him immediately. Grandpa Franklin Boyd had arrived accompanied by his assistant, Jennifer, a sharp-looking woman in her 40s, who was rarely more than a few steps away from him. At 82, Franklin Boyd still cut an imposing figure, tall and straight-backed with a full head of silver hair. He wore a perfectly tailored suit that probably cost more than my yearly salary, and his presence commanded attention without him having to say a word. Layla Monroe's world suddenly spins. She blinks, and memory floods her senses. Sun streaming through childhood kitchen windows, the irresistible scent of cinnamon French toast wafting through the air. Laughter blends with syrup dripping from a stack. The soft crackle of a pop song on the radio dances around her, merging with her father's worried glance toward the newspaper. Franklin Boyd's booming voice punctuates their Saturday rituals with authority. For a blissful moment, the warmth wraps around her, until everything flips. Voices hush, faces tense, and the air thickens with secrets. Each whiff of cinnamon now triggers a blend of suspicion and longing. She never anticipated her family held buried treasures. What truths lie beneath the sweet facade? The wine bar dims like a movie screen, shadows flickering as Layla's parents freeze mid-conversation, expressions shifting from surprise to something darker. Her father's surprised voice breaks the air, straining higher than ever before. "Franklin Boyd, this is unexpected. We weren't sure you would make it." Her grandfather strides in, ignored by her father. Instead, he zeroes in on Layla with softening eyes. "Happy birthday, Layla Monroe." The scent of his expensive cologne envelops her, a blend of leather and cedar. 27 years. Hard to believe how quickly time passes. "Thank you, Grandpa. It means a lot you came." He sits beside her, and a quiet tension descends. "Jennifer tells me your investment portfolio looks strong," he says, eyes piercing into hers. "Your trust should be performing well in this market." Her heart thuds. "What trust fund?" A furrow creases his forehead. Yes, the trust fund established when you were born. You turned 25 2 years ago, so everything should be in your control. Confusion and dread swirl within her. Glancing at her parents, their faces betray panic. I think there's been a mistake, she replies, shock waving through her voice. I don't have a trust fund. Franklin Boyd's expression is stone cold. Of course you do, he states as if stating a fact devoid of warmth. Yours was initially $5 million, plus growth managed by your parents until your control. The words hang heavy in the air, weighty with deceit and revelation. The wine bar fades away, swirling around her as she grapples with the truth. Tension crackles like electricity. What secrets swirl within her family's money game? And how deep does the betrayal run? $5 million trust fund I never knew about. It made no sense. And the loft in Gold Coast. Franklin Boyd continued, his voice pleasant, but his eyes now fixed on my parents. Is it comfortable? I selected that building specifically because of the security and the views of the lake. What loft? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The silence that followed was deafening. My father had gone pale, and my mother looked like she might be sick. Franklin Boyd's expression remained calm, but there was a dangerous stillness to him now, like the moment before a storm breaks. You don't know about the loft, he said. It wasn't a question. The 2-bedroom corner unit in the lakeside tower, purchased 2 years ago as your 25th birthday present. I shook my head slowly, my mind racing to make sense of what was happening. Franklin Boyd turned to my parents with deliberate slowness, his voice dropping to a quiet tone that was somehow more frightening than if he had shouted. Then where did the money go? My father started to speak, a tremor in his voice. Franklin Boyd, there's been a misunderstanding. We can explain everything. I sincerely hope so. My grandfather replied, his tone, making it clear he didn't believe there was any explanation that would satisfy him. He turned to his assistant. Jennifer, please call Stanley and have him meet us here immediately. Already done, sir, Jennifer replied efficiently. He was at a dinner nearby and should arrive within 10 minutes. I've also contacted security at the office to pull all the relevant financial records. The other diners were openly staring now the drama at our table, apparently more interesting than their expensive meals. A waiter hovered nearby, unsure whether to approach. My mother reached across the table for my hand, but I pulled away, a sick feeling growing in the pit of my stomach. Layla Monroe, sweetheart, this isn't how we wanted to tell you. Tell me what I demanded. My voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. Layla traces the wood grain of the table, knuckles white as her parents exchange glances that scream, "Not yet." Franklin's silver watch catches the light ticking down. The silence thickens. No one moves. Her voice finally cracks it. If not now, when? Her father's jaw clenches. The room feels colder. What truth are they still hiding? My own parents. All those years of ramen dinners in our cheap Philly loft, the constant dread from my student loans, while they sat on this secret, a $5 million secret, and a luxury loft I never got the keys to. The air in the private room is heavy with old wood and expensive wine, but all I smell is betrayal. My grandfather, Franklin Boyd, stays perfectly still at the head of the table. His lawyer, Stanley, lays out the brutal facts. The trust fund, my 25th birthday, the total control I was supposed to have. Every word is a hammer blow. I look across at my dad, Calvin, the successful businessman, and my mom, Margaret, the practical one. Their masks are crumbling. Stanley opens his leather briefcase. The documents inside are thick, official. The truth is literally on the table. My father starts to speak, his voice thin. Layla, we were going to tell you. The market was bad. We thought we were protecting you. Protecting me? From what? A life without financial anxiety? My hands are shaking. Franklin's voice cuts through, quiet and deadly. The only thing she needs protection from is you two. Where is her money? The question hangs there. My mother reaches for her water glass, her hand trembling. The ice cubes clink. A tiny, frantic sound in the crushing quiet. My roommate, Jenna, has no idea why I texted her family emergency. How do I even begin to explain this? Franklin's eyes never leave my parents. The loft was purchased, the deed exists, so I will ask one final time. Where is Layla's money? The tension in the room hit like a wave. Layla Monroe gripped the edge of her chair, her pulse racing, the air thick with unspoken words. $8.3 million. The number echoed in her mind, growing louder as her parents avoided her gaze. Franklin Boyd, her grandfather, sat at the head of the table, an enigma cloaked in authority, his jaw set tight. Stanley, the lawyer, hovered over the documents, looking uncharacteristically tense. Just as Layla opened her mouth to demand answers, a hard knock echoed through the silence. Who else knew about the trust? You were supposed to tell her. Stanley's voice shattered the stillness, cutting through Layla's thoughts. The truth she'd been chasing was finally clawing its way to the surface. A trust fund? Why hadn't her parents said a word? Stanley turned serious. The stipulations were clear. Your parents were instructed to inform you at 18. That didn't happen, Layla muttered under her breath. Betrayal seeped into her skin, the threads of her family's fabric fraying before her eyes. Franklin was unwavering. What's the current value of Layla's trust? His gaze pierced through the walls of secrecy. Stanley shuffled through papers, his expression grave. Approximately $8.3 million. This includes expenses for college and other purchases. The room felt like it was shrinking, thoughts spiraling. While she worked long hours to scrape by, millions were just sitting there. Show me proof of all withdrawals, Franklin demanded. Her father's voice chimed in, defensive. It's not what you think. Investments didn't perform. Allocated where, exactly? Franklin shot back, his calm demeanor laced with authority. Calvin Reese, just tell the truth, her mother cried, tears glistening in her eyes. We faced challenges. We had to make adjustments. By stealing from your daughter? Franklin's words cut deep, a chilling accusation. It wasn't stealing. We were protecting her, Calvin interjected desperately, but the truth was starting to unravel. Layla's voice finally rose, shaky yet firm. Protecting me? From what? A life without financial worry? As the weight of their secrets hung thick in the air, the gravity of their choices settled in. Her heart thumped in her chest as sharp as the rain tapping against the window outside, a stark reminder of her reality. Would her family finalize their story? Or were there deeper, darker truths hiding within this web of betrayal? Every heartbeat screamed for resolution. By letting me struggle with student loans in a tiny loft with a roommate while you lived in a 5-bedroom house with a pool. By watching me stress about making rent while you bought new cars and went on luxury vacations. How exactly was that in my best interest? Jennifer quietly placed a glass of water in front of me. I hadn't realized I was shaking until I tried to pick it up and nearly spilled it. Stanley had been examining the financial records with a growing frown. There appeared to be numerous unauthorized withdrawals beginning approximately 7 years ago. Large sums transferred to personal accounts belonging to Calvin Reese and Margaret Carter. He looked up, his expression grim. Based on my preliminary review, it appears that all but approximately $300,000 has been diverted from the trust. The room went silent. $8 million reduced to $300,000. I felt physically ill. Where is the money now? Franklin Boyd asked, his calm voice belying the fury evident in his eyes. My father looked down at his hands. Some of it went to pay off our mortgage, some for cars, renovations to the house, investments in Diane's real estate business, vacations, my mother added quietly, the house in Florida. Memories flashed through my mind, painful in their new context. My parents declining to help with my security deposit on my first loft after college, telling me that my student loan burden was good character building when I expressed anxiety about the payments. My mother showing off her new Mercedes while I took the bus to work because I couldn't afford car payments. All while they had access to millions of dollars that was meant for me. "You let me struggle," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "All those years, all those sleepless nights worrying about money. You watched me work 2 jobs during college. You saw how stressed I was about being laid off last week." My voice grew stronger with my anger. "And you had my money the whole time." The city lights blurred past as Layla exhaled, gripping her phone, heart pounding from everything left unsaid. Her parents' silhouettes lingered under the wine bar's awning, 2 strangers with secrets stitched into their coats. In the hush of the cab, the ticking of the meter felt like a countdown. Layla's mind raced. Who had lied first? And what would she uncover next, now that the masks had shattered? Back at her loft, the scent of rain clung to her jacket. Jenna took one look at her face and knew. She guided Layla to the couch, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. "Talk to me," she whispered. The story spilled out in jagged pieces. "My parents stole $8 million from me." The words sounded absurd in the quiet room. "I applied for food stamps last year, Jenna. I was eating ramen to save money, and they were using my trust fund to remodel their kitchen." A bone-deep anger began to replace the shock. How could they watch her struggle? Why did they do it? The silence in the wine bar had been heavy. Franklin's voice cut through it, cold and final. "We're finished here." Layla had looked at her family, truly seeing them for the first time. Her parents couldn't meet her eyes. Franklin stood like a rock beside her. The foundations of her life were built on lies. What would be left when the dust settled? She watched Calvin and Margaret from the taxi window, seeing them shrink under the streetlights. They looked small. They looked old. But were they the only ones with secrets? The scent of rain still clung to my jacket. My tea sat untouched. Cold. Jenna's hand was a steady anchor on mine. A week had passed, but the city outside our loft window felt like a different world. My phone buzzed. A text from Franklin. "I need to see you. Now." My breath caught. Just this morning, his lawyer, Jennifer, had laid out the cold, hard math. $300,000 left Layla. The rest, real estate, luxury items, bad investments. They even found plane tickets to Panama my parents bought 3 days before my birthday. They were going to run. The only thing that stopped them? Keeping up appearances for a party. My own family. The foundation of my life was just sand. The days bled into a haze of legal meetings and silence. I ignored every call from my parents. My father's family said Franklin was overreacting, but my mother's sister called me herself to apologize. And then, my cousin Natalie reached out, an unexpected ally in this war. My phone buzzed again. Franklin's message glowed. What painful truth was waiting for me now? She showed up at my loft unannounced one afternoon looking uncharacteristically subdued. I always wondered why Uncle Calvin Reese and Aunt Margaret Carter lived so well when Dad said our trust funds were basically the same size she admitted sitting uncomfortably on my worn couch. I guess now we know. It turned out that Natalie's trust had been properly managed, but was much smaller than mine had been. She had been careful with her money, making it last, while flaunting a lifestyle that was more modest than it appeared on social media. "I was always jealous of how close you seemed with your parents," she confessed. "My parents were always honest about the money, but they were never really there for me emotionally. I thought you had both the loving parents and were being modest about your wealth. I never imagined they were stealing from you." That conversation was the beginning of an unexpected friendship with my cousin, one bright spot in the darkness that had engulfed my life. The legal proceedings moved forward relentlessly. Franklin Boyd's team discovered that only about $300,000 remained of my original trust. The rest had been spent on my parents' lavish lifestyle or lost in bad investments. The house in Florida and their primary residence were both seized as they had been purchased directly with trust fund money. The cars, the boat, my father rarely used my mother's extensive jewelry collection, all documented and evaluated for potential recovery. Through it all, my parents continued their desperate attempts to contact me. The messages shifted from explanation attempts to outright begging as the legal consequences became clear. My father called from a hotel room claiming they had nowhere to go. My mother sent long emails about how everything they did was ultimately for my benefit, though she never managed to explain exactly how their luxury lifestyle had helped me in any way. The media caught wind of the story. The scent of rain on hot pavement and distant laughter, a sudden flash, my 7th birthday, cake crumbs, the cold whip of frosting on my nose, Franklin's booming laugh bouncing off high ceilings, light pooled on the hardwood, the faint smell of expensive cigars from the study, and my mother's perfume, a soft cloud trying to hide the tension, my dad counting envelopes in the corner. Even then, I tasted it. Something sour beneath all that sugar, a suspicion that lingered for years. I just never knew how deep it went. A business publication ran a piece on our family's financial dispute. No names, but the hints were clear. Trust fund misappropriation by close relatives. I deleted all my social media. I couldn't face the questions. The worst part was the guilt. It gnawed at me constantly. Had I driven them to this? Was I overreacting? My therapist said this was normal for victims of family betrayal, but knowing that didn't make the ache any less real. After 3 weeks of legal fog, Franklin invited me to his penthouse. The space was luxurious but strangely warm. He dismissed the staff and fixed our drinks himself. "I want you to know that none of this is your fault," he said, his voice low. He looked straight at me. "Your parents made their choices. They betrayed you, and the trust I placed in them." "I keep thinking I should have known," I admitted. The city lights glittered outside the window. "There were signs." "You had no reason to suspect your own parents," Franklin replied firmly, "especially when you didn't even know the money existed." That night he showed me photographs I'd never seen. My grandmother, who died when I was young. Franklin as a young man, building his first development. My mother as a little girl, sitting on his shoulders in some sunny park. His voice grew soft. "Family is complicated. Your grandmother and we didn't always see eye to eye. I was too strict, too focused on the business." The silence that followed was heavy with generations of mistakes. Perhaps if I had been different, your mother might have developed a healthier relationship with money. For a moment, Franklin wasn't a titan. He was just a father who'd failed his daughter. It was the most vulnerable I'd ever seen him, and it cracked something open in me. The betrayal wasn't just my pain. They hadn't just stolen from me. They had betrayed the father who tried to secure my future. 1 month after my birthday, I agreed to meet them. The mediation was in a downtown high-rise, all glass and cold light, the kind of place that made my parents look small. They had aged a decade in a month. My father's face was gaunt. Dark circles haunted his eyes. My mother's hands wouldn't stop trembling. She clutched a purse I'd never seen. Their clothes were all wrong, too plain. I learned later they'd sold their designer labels. The conference room was a cavern of silence. Franklin sat beside me. Our legal team flanked us. My parents had one lawyer. He just shuffled papers, nervous. The forensic team began. Their words were clinical, precise. Charts glowed on a screen. They mapped 7 years of theft. It started small. A few borrowed thousands. Then it became a flood. The money bought their house, their cars, lavish vacations. It funded my mother's failed luxury real estate startup. It vanished into my father's terrible day trading. With every slide, my father sank lower. Defensive. My mother just stared at the table. She wiped at silent tears. When it finally ended, the room held its breath. Franklin leaned forward. His voice was low. A final verdict. The forensic accounting is complete. We know exactly where every dollar went." The air went still. All I could smell was the sterile office air and the faint scent of rain on my coat. My mother's hands were shaking. My father just stared at the polished table. The only question left was civil or criminal. Their lawyer cleared his throat. "My clients wish to make amends." Amends? The word felt like sand in my mouth. "You stole my future. You watched me eat instant noodles in a cramped loft, while you lived in a house my money bought. How do you make amends for that?" My father couldn't look at me. "Layla." It started small, alone, to get through a rough patch. My mother's voice was a whisper. We told ourselves we deserved it, for all the sacrifices. "And my loft?" I asked. "The one Grandpa bought for me. What was the plan there?" They exchanged a glance. My father sighed. "We were renting it out. The income came to us." The truth hit me all over again. My own parents were my landlords. While I struggled with Jenna to make rent, they were profiting from my property. Franklin placed a steady hand on my shoulder. His voice was calm, final. "Option 1. You sign over every asset bought with her money. You agree to a full repayment plan. In exchange, Layla does not press charges." They nodded, desperate. "Option 2, Franklin said, his tone hardening into ice. "You obfuscate. You lie, and we pursue criminal charges for fraud and embezzlement. The evidence is undeniable. You will both go to prison for a very long time." He suddenly stood, casting a long shadow across the table. The attorney stiffened. Without warning, Franklin slid a torn receipt toward me. His voice was rough, almost unrecognizable. "Your trust wasn't the only thing stolen." The room chilled. For the first time, I realized my grandfather may not be my ally. The betrayal ran deeper than blood, and every heartbeat sounded like a ticking clock. What else was about to unravel? "We'll take option 1, Calvin said, his voice too fast. "Full cooperation." My grandfather's eyes locked on me. The final call was always going to be mine. I saw them then. Not just the thieves who stole my future, but my parents. The ones who read me stories and tied my shoes. The ones who watched me scrape by, all while living in a house my own money bought. My chest felt tight. The sterile air tasted bitter. "No prisons," I said, my voice steady. "But I want every single cent back. And I want you to say it, out loud, everything you did." For hours they signed. Paper after paper. Their Florida house was now mine. Their cars, their entire life unraveled with the scratch of a pen. When the lawyers finally left, the room fell silent. "Why?" The word hung in the air between us. My mother's hand touched mine. I let her. "We were drowning," she whispered. "Bad investments. A lifestyle we couldn't quit. Your money was just there. An easy fix that became a habit." "We have a sickness," my father said, his eyes finally meeting mine. "With spending. With keeping up. It doesn't excuse a thing, but it's the truth." Their confession was a small crack in the wall between us. Not enough to rebuild on, but a start. 2 weeks later, I turned the key in my own loft. It was quiet. The scent of fresh paint filled the air. For the first time in a long time, something was truly mine. It wasn't the luxury Gold Coast property that should have been mine, but it was mine, free and clear with no mortgage or rent to worry about. Franklin Boyd had helped me select it, insisting on security features and a good location near public transportation. With Franklin Boyd's guidance, I began to learn about financial management. The recovered assets, including the Florida house and various liquidated possessions, amounted to just over $1 million, a fraction of what the trust should have been worth, but still a life-changing amount for someone who had been living paycheck to paycheck. A new job opportunity came through a connection of Walter's, a position at a respected design firm with better pay and advancement potential than my previous job. While I was initially hesitant to accept help that felt like nepotism, Franklin Boyd pointed out that getting me the interview was all he had done. Earning the position had been entirely my achievement. As spring turned to summer, I began to establish new routines and boundaries. I allowed limited contact with my parents, accepting brief phone calls, but declining their requests to visit. They had moved into a small rental loft and were both in therapy for financial addiction, a term I had never heard before, but which apparently described their behavior accurately. Franklin Boyd and I grew closer, our weekly dinners becoming a fixture in my calendar. He taught me about investments and business with the same precision and attention to detail that had made him successful. I began to see past his gruff exterior to the complex, caring man beneath. Jennifer surprisingly became something of a friend as well. Having worked for Franklin Boyd for over 15 years, she had stories about him that humanized him in ways I had never expected. She also proved to be an excellent mentor for professional development, helping me navigate office, politics, and career planning with her characteristic efficiency. The city lights began to glow through the loft's large windows, painting long shadows across unpacked boxes. The scent of rain on concrete drifted up from the street. My phone chimed. An email from Thomas, my college friend. Our reconnection had been my anchor. But this wasn't a friendly note. It was a forwarded document, a massive attachment. My thumb tapped the screen. Bank statements, financial records, all from my family's accounts. My chest tightened. Confusion, sharp and cold. I saw Thomas's smiling face from the wine bar earlier today. So charming. So coincidental. The hum of Philadelphia traffic below suddenly sounded like a warning. Every car horn, every distant siren. It all amplified the pulse in my ears. Why would he have these? What does he want? Was our entire reunion a lie? My new life had finally felt like my own. Not the Gold Coast mansion I was promised, but this bright loft, owned outright. No mortgage. $1 million safety net, carefully managed by my grandfather, Franklin. My job at the startup hub was booming. I was leading a team now, respected. My parents, Calvin and Margaret, were in their small rental, in therapy for their financial addiction. I kept them at a careful distance. Franklin became my real guide. His weekly dinners taught me about investments, and trust, and Thomas. He felt like a gift, a connection untouched by my family's betrayal. With him, I was just Layla. Now this email shatters that peace. These documents in my hands, they smell like secrets. His smile now seems like a mask. What game is he playing? The financial pages glowed on my screen, line after line of transactions. I scrolled, my heart a frantic drum. Then I saw it. A pattern. Large withdrawals. All from my father's accounts, dated months before the trust was supposed to be drained. My breath caught. This wasn't just about my stolen inheritance. This was something else. Something bigger. The final transfer was to a shell corporation. One name was listed as the beneficiary. Thomas R. Ellington. I froze. The room tilted. His name. His full name. It wasn't a coincidence. He wasn't just a messenger. He was part of it. The truth clicked into place, cold and horrifying. He didn't find me by accident at that coffee shop. He was sent. My family's financial collapse. He wasn't a stranger to it. He was a player. My anchor was never an anchor. It was a trap. The scent of rain on the city pavement was sharp. I watched my parents through the cafe window. They looked small. My mother, Margaret, fumbled with her purse. Her hands, once used to holding designer handbags, now clutched a worn manila envelope. "We found these," she said, her voice low, "going through old files for our financial counselor." She slid a slip of paper across the table. It was a receipt for a payment. Not to me. Not to my grandfather, Franklin. The name was one I'd never seen before. My father, Calvin, stared into his coffee. "We don't know what it means, Layla." But the date, it was from before the trust was drained, before their confession. This was a different trail, a different secret. My heart hammered against my ribs. The family's financial mystery just split wide open. The source wasn't who anyone suspected. Was the betrayal bigger than we ever imagined? Trust, once so fragile, now felt like quicksand. My mother had surrendered her real estate license. She was just an admin assistant now. The social fallout hit them hardest. Old friends vanished, no more country club invites, no charity galas. They arrived at the coffee shop early. Nervous, no gifts, just a desperate hope. "We're making amends," Margaret said, her hands wrapped tight around her cup. "To you, to Franklin, to ourselves." My father nodded. "We have separate accounts now, strict budgets. It's like recovery." I listened, I watched. The designer labels were gone. Their old identity was stripped away. Before we parted, she asked for a monthly lunch. I said I'd consider it. The door wasn't closed. Not anymore. Franklin had a health scare, a warning about his blood pressure. It slowed him down, made him reflective. "Your grandmother always said family was worth fighting for," he told me at dinner. The pain of the betrayal was still there. But so was a softening, a hope for something new, something real. The last of the city's evening light bled through my loft window, catching the dust motes dancing over my desk. Stacks of receipts and old ledgers lay sprawled before me. A sea of numbers that refused to make sense. My phone lit up. Not a text from my parents, but from my grandfather, Franklin. It wasn't advice. It was a single, stark image. A legal transfer of assets. Notarized. The signature was my mother's, her practiced cursive unmistakable. The date. Years ago. My pulse slammed in my ears. This wasn't just my parents' betrayal. It was hers alone. A secret life, funded in silence. Every memory of her, tilted. The familiar hum of the loft turned into a dull roar of doubt. Everything I trusted was a lie. My self-respect, my safety. Those were non-negotiable. But understanding, even forgiveness. Maybe that was a different kind of strength. I was learning from Franklin. Not just how to manage money, but how to live with a broken heart. His own pain was a raw, deep thing. My parents' actions had crushed him. Yet he never let that anger color his love for me. He was my steady ground. With his quiet encouragement, I'd built something new. A tiny side hustle in visual storytelling, consulting for hungry startups. They couldn't afford the big firms. I was building something that was mine. Just mine. No family name, no recovered money. My confidence wasn't just growing, it was becoming unshakable. Those therapy sessions I'd started in crisis, they became my anchor. I started seeing the patterns, learning that their terrible choices were never a reflection of my worth. I was a victim of their secrets, not my own failures. I was slowly learning to trust my gut again. Then came Franklin's surprise. 6 months to the day after my birthday. The day everything fell apart. He booked a private room at a wine bar, even more exclusive than the last. My stomach was in knots walking in, but the energy was different. Warm. Jenna was there. My cousin Natalie. Even Thomas. They were all there. For me. Franklin raised his glass. His voice was soft but strong. 6 months ago, your world cracked open, he said. Tonight, we're not here for what broke. We're here for what you built from the pieces. After dinner, he handed me a small wrapped box. Inside, a single key and a deed. To a new loft. It was modest, but it was safe. And it was all mine. The Gold Coast property was sold as part of the recovery efforts, he explained. This one is entirely yours. Purchased with recovered funds, but selected specifically for your current life, not the one that was taken from you. The gesture moved me to tears, not because of the material value, but because it represented a clean break with the past, a fresh start untainted by betrayal. My relationship with Natalie had evolved from cautious connection to genuine friendship. Free from the artificial competition that had characterized our earlier interactions, we discovered shared interests and complementary personalities. She had even invested in my side business, providing capital for expansion in exchange for a modest equity stake. A transaction. Franklin Boyd had helped structure to ensure fairness for both of us. "I always thought you had the perfect family," she confessed during a lunch date. "It's strange how we envied each other for things that weren't even real." Thomas had become more than a friend in recent months, our coffee meetings evolving into dinner dates and long conversations that often continued late into the evening. He had been present through the worst of the aftermath without trying to fix or minimize my pain, simply offering steady support and occasional necessary distraction. When he kissed me for the first time on a walk along the lake shore near my new loft, it felt like crossing a threshold into a part of my life untouched by the betrayal. Here was something entirely new, a relationship built on a foundation of honesty. From the beginning, I had begun using a portion of my recovered funds to establish a small mentorship program for young designers from disadvantaged backgrounds, providing scholarships for software training and professional development. The program was still in its infancy, but helping others who faced financial barriers to creative careers brought a sense of purpose that transcended my personal experience. As fall turned to winter, I realized that while the betrayal would always be part of my story, it no longer defined my daily existence. I was building something new, something authentic from the painful truth rather than comfortable lies. 1 year after the birthday, that changed everything. I found myself in a place I never could have imagined. Not just financially secure, but emotionally stronger with clearer boundaries and deeper, more authentic relationships than I had before the betrayal. The healing journey had not been linear. There were still days when anger would surge unexpectedly, when the memory of those years of unnecessary struggle would feel fresh and raw. But those moments came less frequently now, subsumed by the full life I was building. My parents and I had established a cautious reconciliation process. We met monthly for lunch with clear boundaries and expectations. They had shown genuine remorse, continuing their therapy and making small but consistent restitution payments that Franklin Boyd's team had structured as part of their amends process. I never thought I would sit at a table with them again without feeling rage. I admitted to my therapist during one of our now bi-weekly sessions. It is not forgetting or even complete forgiveness yet, but it is something like peace. The financial education Franklin Boyd had provided had transformed my relationship with money. I now managed my investments with confidence, understanding the balance between security and growth. The remaining trust funds, though far smaller than they should have been, were carefully managed to provide long-term stability while allowing me to live comfortably in the present. Franklin Boyd had experienced another health scare more serious than the first that had required a brief hospitalization. The fragility of his mortality brought perspective to our family situation. Despite the betrayal, despite the legal consequences, he was still my grandfather and my parents' father. The city glowed outside Layla Monroe's window. Rain tapped softly against the glass. Her work for the day was done. She felt proud, independent. She had built a life here, in this small Philly loft, from the painful truth. Then, a buzz. Her phone lit up the dim room. A message. Not from Thomas. Not from her roommate, Jenna. Not from her family. It was from her business manager, the one she'd trusted completely. Her eyes scanned the email. The words blurred, then snapped into horrifying focus. Hidden transfers. Names she'd never seen before, all traced back to one person, her mother. A cold dread prickled down her spine. The betrayal wasn't just from her parents. It had slithered into her own startup, the one place she'd felt safe, the one thing that was truly hers. Her heart hammered against her ribs. The cozy room suddenly felt like a cage. The truth was a key, turning a lock she didn't know existed. It forced her to see everything. Her parents, her life, with new, chilling eyes. Months of cautious reconciliation with her parents felt like a fragile lie. The small restitution payments from Calvin and Margaret, were they just a performance? Was their therapy just for show? Every conversation at their careful lunches now seemed scripted. Every apology felt hollow, layered with a secrecy she could now almost taste. Even her grandfather, Franklin, seemed more enigmatic. His recent health scare had brought them closer. He'd shared his own regrets, his triumphs. But had he known the full extent of it? Had he suspected her mother's reach was this long, this personal? The family transparency he demanded. Was it only for others? The loft was quiet. Jenna was out. Layla just stared at the screen. The numbers were undeniable. Her own mother had been siphoning from her fledgling business, the very business Layla had built to escape their shadow. Why? Was it about control? Was it to keep her dependent? Or was it something darker, a compulsion her mother couldn't break? The financial mystery had a new, horrifying chapter. It wasn't just about stolen inheritance. It was a parasite on her present, feeding on her hard work. She thought she was resilient. She thought she had rebuilt. But the foundation was still cracking under her feet. Who could she possibly trust now? A year after her world first fractured, Layla found herself in a place of quiet strength. The journey wasn't linear. Anger still surged sometimes. The memory of those years of struggle could feel fresh and raw. But those moments were now overshadowed by the full, authentic life she was building. Her relationship with her parents was a careful, distant peace. They made their payments. They went to therapy. But a chasm remained, wide and deep. Franklin's mortality had given them all perspective. He was still her grandfather. She spent hours at his bedside, learning about his life, understanding the complex family dynamics that had, perhaps, shaped her parents. It explained, but it never excused. Her design business flourished. She hired junior designers. She even hired a new, thoroughly vetted business manager. Her mentorship program for young artists grew, bringing her a deep, genuine satisfaction. Thomas's key turned in the lock. He found her in the kitchen, the grim email still open on her tablet. He listened. He didn't offer easy answers. He just held her. Their relationship, built on a transparency she now cherished, was her bedrock. "You know what amazes me most about you," he said later as they cooked, "how you've taken something that could have made you bitter and turned it into growth instead." The loft was her home, modest but truly hers, filled with her art, her colors, her joy. Her cousin Natalie was now a real friend. The artificial competition between them was gone, replaced by mutual support. Layla looked around. She was financially secure, emotionally stronger. She had clear boundaries and deep, honest relationships. The healing was a choice she made every day, and she chose to keep building. The clatter of plates quieted. Franklin cleared his throat, a single sheet of paper clutched in his thin hand. The room froze. Forks hung in midair. He slid the document down the table to me. His eyes, sharp as ever, glittered. "Read it, Layla." My world tilted. The letter was in my mother's handwriting, dated a decade ago. The scent of roasted garlic faded into nothing. What was this? Shock and possibility flooded the air. Every secret was about to spill. He'd grown so frail this past year, but his mind was a steel trap. He watched me, waiting. My heart hammered against my ribs. This wasn't about money anymore, was it? The paper felt heavy with history. The rustle of it was deafening in the silent room. My fingers trembled. What truth was I about to uncover? A year ago, I thought everything was destroyed. I raised my glass at our small gathering. Thomas, Jenna, Natalie, my chosen family looked back. But a false foundation lets you build something true. Franklin nodded, his eyes bright. His voice was rough with emotion. To truth, he said. We all echoed him. The word hung in the air, powerful and complete. Later, just Thomas and I remained. We loaded the dishwasher in our comfortable, quiet rhythm. I finally understood. Financial wealth was not the most valuable currency. Trust was. Authenticity was. Those were so much harder to rebuild. Forgiveness isn't a single act. It's a process. It doesn't mean forgetting. It means letting go of the anger. We can't choose what happens to us. But we have absolute power over how we respond. We control the narrative. The betrayal is a chapter in my story. But it will never be the whole book. Rain spattered softly against the loft windows. Layla Monroe stood, trembling, facing her family in the dim light. The air was thick with the scent of old books and cold coffee. Franklin Boyd's stare was a weight. Calvin Reese was a statue of silence. Margaret Carter's hands were twisted tight in her lap. A single tear traced Layla's cheek. Then, Jenna Pierce squeezed her shoulder. Solid. Warm. Layla's voice cut through the quiet, fierce and raw. It was a confession, a release, and, in its wake, a fragile, healing relief. The downpour outside began to ease. A new trust, delicate as a seedling, pushed through the ruined earth. Thank you for staying with my story. Have you ever faced a betrayal that changed everything? Did a broken trust ever force you to rebuild something stronger? Share your journey in the comments. If this resonated, let me know. Remember, the most painful truths can sometimes set you free.